Good evening, and welcome to Game Theory Today. I'm Eric Garland. We've got a great show tonight. There's a lot going on. America and about 8 other countries. The list is growing at all times. At war with Iran. So the Middle Eastern situation is way up in the air. What a great time to dig into the attacks of September 11th, 2001. There's enough going on. I probably wouldn't have gotten into this topic, but for an astonishing new article in LA Magazine right now by the esteemed crime writer and investigator Michele McPhee, a proud daughter of Boston and current resident of Los Angeles, who's digging into the events of September 11th and how they relate to what went on in Southern California at that time. And that's something I have done investigation into as well. And as soon as I was done, promptly stopped and paused and waited for history to catch up. But Michele is a longtime investigative journalist, an expert in criminal investigations and other things. We're going to bring her up and we're going to have a rollicking good time here. Let's bring her on. Michele, how are you there?
How are ya? It's good to see you, Eric.
We're going to conduct this entirely in a series of New England accents, since you challenged whether or not I was really from the New England area, and I'm, I take that as a challenge.
Well, you proved yourself. You proved when you told me how you ordered a large coffee and a garlic bagel. I'm like, all right, kid, you're it.
All righty. You are not just from Boston. You are from Eastie.
Correct.
All
East
right.
Boston.
East Boston.
Yes.
And,
East Boston.
And you write books about all kinds of stuff. You've written, what, 5, 6, 7 books somewhere in there?
7 books, yep. Usually long form investigative pieces like the kind that you're prone to dig into, where you pull a thread and everything starts to disentangle and you just can't stop until you have the answers. And as we both know, we have many sleepless nights because of these sorts of stories.
Okay, now my listeners are going to love this, that I have someone to be with to talk about this kind of stuff. So you've written about the Tsarnaev brothers, right?
Correct. Yep. Who I think my book proves that the older brother was working as an asset for certain federal entities. You know, they threw him over in Chechnya and he was recording family members, and he helped counterterrorism officials in Dagestan track and kill some very high-level terror targets during his trip to Russia. When he came back to Boston, all of a sudden he's on the fast track to citizenship that he was not eligible for in any way, because he
Hold
was,
on, which country's federal? Because there's federal entities in Australia.
See, I believe he had some really serious ties to the Boston FBI field office, but more importantly to the CIA through his uncle's father-in-law, a guy named Graham Fuller, who I'm sure you, given your work, is familiar with.
Okay, so you've tied the Boston Marathon bombing to the CIA. Anything else you dug into? Just out of curiosity.
Well, of course, we have some Armenian mobsters who teamed up with a polygamous cult in Utah known as the Kingston Clan, who, by the way, were laundering their money through Turkey with a CIA asset named Baran Korkmaz, handled by Graham Fuller.
Okay, so you've tied Turkish underworld to a variety of hostile intelligence services. You've messed around with the Kremlin here, and now as dessert, you've decided to dig into the Saudi role in September 11th.
Well, I think this is a case I can never let go of, because on that terrible morning, I was at ground zero. I woke up that day and I had a great front page story. I was the police bureau chief of the Daily News, and we worked out of One Police Plaza, which was very close to the World Trade Center towers.
Got it.
I was all excited about my front page, Black Panther capture. There was a great story about a guy, Patrick Critton, who had hijacked a couple of planes and landed in Cuba and was on the lam all over the world in Tunisia. And they finally captured him with the great work of the NYPD. And this was like a stellar NYPD investigation. I had been working on it for months. It was one of those deals where once in a while the cops say, hey, can you settle down on the story for a minute? Give us some breathing room to find the guy, and then we'll give you the exclusive. which they actually followed through with when I did just that. So on September 10th, we got them. We splashed the story, as they say in the business. It was the front page of the New York Daily on the morning of September 11th, and I will never forget it burning and blowing all over Lower Manhattan as those towers came down. And I lost, like many of us, many friends that terrible
Wow.
morning.
Got it.
343 firefighters, 23 New York City cops, 37 Port Authority police officers, a retired FBI agent that we're all familiar with.
And
There were a lot of
and
people we knew
you
in our world.
and you were the head of the police beat for the Daily News.
Yes, I was. So,
So
our
the
instinct is to run towards the towers, obviously, but that's where I was going. And I got grabbed physically by a police chief that I knew pretty well, Tom Fahey. And Tom Fahey said, "You're not going that way, you're going this way." And the people who followed Tom Fahey lived, and the people in the command center where we were all trying to get to did not. So, 9/11 was a very crucial time in my life. I spent 5 years covering the ugly aftermath. I did my best to try to profile the heroes that we lost that day. And to this day, as you can see, I'm friends with many of the people that I wrote about almost 25 years ago, if you can believe it. 25 years ago. It's astonishing to think that it's been that long.
And yet there is a bunch to still uncover.
And yet we're still being lied to. And people who I believe, and I think many people believe, are tied in it. The evidence is overwhelming. The ties to the Saudi government and to the hijackers who first arrived. The first two guys came to Southern California, and they came here for a reason. We now know, after 25 years of stonewalling from our own Justice Department, the 9/11 families are finally getting some answers. And as you know, because you were the first person to pull at this thread when the reports were declassified, a lot of this information.
The first to go at it in the unclassified space on Twitter in the way that I did. And I don't think that there was nobody in major media that followed up on that. But
there's been very few. It's shocking how little people are writing about 9/11. Especially when you know that, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who has now finally cooperated, he is confirming a lot of the information that these 9/11 families have been pursuing in a lawsuit that we both know as Ashton versus the Saudi royal family. And it's fat. So I'll let you undig it because you were the first person to kind of go through these declassified files, and it was unbelievable how much information is in them. And that wasn't even anything yet.
Because, okay, so for the viewers out there, I wrote a thread in September of 2021 within hours, if not minutes, of when the Biden administration declassified on September 11th, 2021. They put out a bunch of redacted still. There's redactions in there. They declassified quite a few FBI 302 reports and I think intelligence analyst reports that detailed in particular the role of Saudi agents and the Saudi government itself through its consulate in Los Angeles, California, and activities around the King Farhad Mosque, where George H.W. Bush's old chief of staff, John Sununu, was on site when they christened it, I believe. Maybe christened is probably the wrong verb, but dedicated it. He was there at the opening ceremony. Maybe it was Chris Sunu, John Sununu's son, I think. At any rate, interesting, Bush family connections going on there. That information was declassified. And I said, well, one, this is being declassified on September 11th, on the 20th anniversary of the attacks. So it seemed quite symbolic. And there's a lot of stuff from the Biden administration that they didn't follow through on. Maybe a second Biden administration would have followed through on that if there had been continuity. Sometimes happens. It's one of the advantages of having a second administration as a president. But either way, this stuff was revealed, and I did a Twitter thread, which I think got in the thousands of views. It was not major media, but then again, the media corporations have been roundly hostile to me on a very nasty and personal level since I came out and revealed the influence of hostile foreign intelligence in the 2016 election. That's when I went from being an author for The Atlantic to being a butt of jokes from The Atlantic. Isn't that interesting? You're a writer. Like if you're an author at a media outlet and all of a sudden they start writing hit pieces on you without even calling you for a quote, that's kind of,
And that's why we need independent media. I'm a firm believer in independent media for this very reason. I think that this story all around has been ignored. And at this point now, I think we can agree, this is not crazy ranting Reddit threads. This is a well-documented court case that is filled with public discovery, that any human being can go into Pacer and read what we are talking about. This is not nutso conspiracy theory.
Conspiracy theory.
Discovery. This is discovery in a case, in a landmark civil suit. So
let's catch everybody up that there is a civil tort lawsuit from at least one family who was
many families, I believe.
Okay, it's a multi-plaintiff lawsuit. There are families in the United States who were aggrieved by the loss of the companionship and the relationship of their family members who died that day, and they are seeking to be made whole, to recover losses from the Saudi government, right?
Correct. Yep. And this is a landmark case. It could reach trillions of dollars. And what the 9/11 justice families argue is, look, there is a clear nexus of the funding of these hijackers when they first arrived. And the first two, as we know, showed up right here in Los Angeles. They landed at LAX. And really, if you go back through the history, and it's well documented now, none of this is in dispute. These guys had just gone to an Al-Qaeda summit in Malaysia. They were with the leaders of Al-Qaeda, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. These guys were little mini celebrities because they had already been fighting on behalf of the Mujahideen for years. They had been in Bosnia, they had been in other parts of the Middle East, fighting on behalf of Al-Qaeda, but whatever formation of Al-Qaeda it was before Osama bin Laden had taken over. They had pledged allegiance to Osama bin Laden in Bosnia while fighting alongside the Taliban. And
so this
now
is 1990s. You have the decade of the 90s. You have the fall of the Soviet Union. And you also, this connects to the period that a lot of people know as Charlie Wilson's War, where you had the Soviets invade Afghanistan. And in a phenomenally successful operation, the CIA funds its largest covert operation, bringing war to the USSR in Afghanistan through a proxy, and that proxy was the Mujahideen, who eventually they became the Taliban. But at that time, they were ready to fight against the abuses of the Soviets and were righteous in doing so. They were very religious. They were very tribal amongst themselves. These are, Afghan tribes where, the Afghanis are known. I believe the country is nicknamed in some areas the graveyard of empires because nobody's held the place successfully since Alexander the Great. And that's a clue.
That's interesting. I'd never heard that term, but that's interesting.
Alexander the Great subdued the place, and he was the last one to do so successfully. Everybody else leaves the way the Soviets did, and then we did. So the 1990s come up, and I started in the world of intelligence in the 1990s. And I was in Washington, D.C. for 9/11. And I was an analyst in D.C. when the Taliban started blowing up Buddha statues. And people were looking at the blasphemy of that and sort of the anti-civilization angle to these cats. And I knew a lot of guys who were Cold Warriors, people that had trained in the Russian language, who really knew what the Soviets got up to. And there was this false sense of security during the Clinton administration that dovetailed into the George W. Bush administration of, well, it's over here. We're done. And we won. And sure, the .com era, there was a lot of money to be made. It was easy money. There was, it was a sunny time in the United States. We seemed to have won ideologically, and the things that we had innovated throughout the 20th century, like business techniques, like gap accounting, or general corporate marketing practices. These are things that we started exporting around the world, and the executives were very excited to export it to China and Russia, our supposedly former ideological enemies, adversaries at the very least in China's case, enemies in Russia's, and that we weren't going to compete against them with nukes or the space race. We were going to do it by teaching them how to do corporate marketing, this being the 1990s. But I knew a lot of the Cold War types who were a couple things. They were there to say, do not take your eyes off the Russians. They are not done. You don't know them like I do. And they seemed kind of unreasonable, but in a very reasonable way. Like they much had they seen, much had they done, or in the area around McLean, Virginia, Langley, Virginia area. They're like, we are not done, people.
And clearly that was the same attitude of the Mujahideen. They were hardly done. They were just getting started in late 1990, early 2000, which is where this Malaysia summit was. We have these two hijackers, the ones that ended up taking down the Pentagon. They landed at LAX on January 15th, day 2000. Days before, they were photographed in Malaysia with exactly who you're talking about. These people who've been fighting for a long time, initially against Russia, then they were in Bosnia, then they've been all over the world. These are seasoned warriors who were just picked for the biggest, most outrageous plot that Osama bin Laden could come up with. He called it Operation Holy Tuesday. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed called it the Plains Operation. And these two young Saudis, who were rich kids, these were two little rich kids from prominent families in Mecca.
Sure.
Both of them, wealthy kids from good families in Mecca, and they were determined to take down America. And that plan started the minute they landed at LAX and were picked up by an Eritrean who was a congregant at the King Fahd Mosque, which an FBI agent put in a declaration saying the entire mosque was paid for by King Fahd, his namesake. Immediately at that time when they landed, the Saudis had put in this very radical imam, Fahad al-Thayumi. This guy was somebody who was screaming death to America all day long. He had tons of if you are an infidel, you should die literature that was printed up by the Saudis and put all over that mosque. So the idea that the first place that these two hijackers went was to be picked up by a congregant from the mosque, driven directly to the mosque. And this is how they got their start in California. The mosque was the one that hooked them up with the plane lessons, with their licenses, with their shipbox car they parked at Dulles Airport. Everything that they did, their roots in what took place on Tuesday, September 11th, happened right here in California in a very fancy little suburban place called Culver City. This mosque takes up a whole block. And every time I drive by this mosque now, I'm like, I cannot believe this, that there is proof now that this plot was funded. I mean, look, it was launched into place by very high-ranking people. It would be the same as if we went to Saudi Arabia and you had George W. Bush and Dick Cheney set up a church, and all of a sudden there's all kinds of American terrorists that are working out of this church. We would have a problem with that, I think, as Americans.
Now, you are extremely knowledgeable in how the government works and how law enforcement works. I get the sense you have an idea of how counterintelligence works. generally spy
I
catching.
mean, generally, very generally.
Generally.
Not like you do. Yep.
Are you familiar with how the Chinese and the Saudis would handle somebody else from another country coming in with a different church at all? Let's not even get to where what else they're going to say. Do you think that would raise some hackles?
I think it might, but here it was celebrated, as you mentioned. You
Here
had
we don't only
high-ranking
have the
Bush
church.
officials.
We had these guys coming in going, "Oh, and we hate you." And
You should die. If you are a
you should
Christian
die.
or a Jew, you should die. You should die. It literally is printed in propaganda in the church. It would be like you go to, Sunday Mass on Hanover Street at my favorite church, St. Leonard's, and I pick up a brochure that says everyone who's not Catholic should die. I would be alarmed by that, but nobody apparently was.
I mean, nobody apparently was. These guys were absolutely like, yes, you should all die. And we have religious freedom in the United States, which is great, we are both from the New England area. My family helped chart the area that they landed Plymouth, where they landed the Pilgrims on. I'm pre-Mayflower, which I never get invited
right off the Mayflower. Yeah.
Peter Garland was pre-Mayflower, which I would, if I ever got invited to any place in Back Bay, Boston, I would totally lord over those people. But never gets brought up. But we instituted, religious freedom so that we could be nuts and we could have our nutty religious beliefs away from the more mainstream ones in England and the Netherlands and whatnot. But
this went well beyond that.
Beyond that. But
these two guys show up in LA and they're like, what the actual hell? Can you imagine? These guys have been fighting for the Mujahideen in the most, war-torn regions of the world. And suddenly they show up and by the way, they're also into Wahhabism. So these are not people who are used to women walking around scantily clad. They are certainly not used to, Los Angeles culture. They're completely out of place. They don't know what to do. And the imam says, guess what? I have a guy that can help you out. He just happens to be a Saudi intelligence officer, but he also has a much friendlier area for you guys that you might fit in a little bit more. There's another mosque also funded by the Saudis where the American Al-Qaeda, the very famous one that was taken out by a drone strike, used to attend. So now we have a
And where was that? Just so we know. So you have
in San
Culver
Diego,
City.
California. So Culver City, these guys get their start. They hang out at the King Fahad Mosque.
Just for the people that are not from Los Angeles, Culver City is a suburb of Los Angeles, right?
It's not really a suburb. Los Angeles is such a sprawl. It's a giant sprawl. So for people,
my point is, it's in LA. But there's another one in San Diego.
It's an LA nice neighborhood, yes. So LA's, and then 2 hours away is San Diego, and that's where they end up. And they end up initially in the care of, we now know, is a Saudi intelligence agent. His name is Omar al-Bayami. He too had been sent to Southern California, according to this lawsuit and the discovery that has recently become declassified, to set up a cell. And they called them, the Saudis have a word for it. They call it propagandists. Like, these are guys who are here specifically to spread radical Islam. That's their job. They're here like it's their job, and they do get paid for it. That is their job.
So I want to spook-splain this.
Please, now spook-splain for us.
Fed
speak, as I call it. Give us the Fed speak.
There's a really bright line between being a jerk with an opinion and being the representative of a country. So when we look at like Russian propaganda, there's a lot of people running around with Russian talking points in our elections at any given time. And they meet a number of criteria, the most benign of which is useful idiot, which is a translation from the Russian that I believe Stalin came up with, to say somebody that is dumb and naturally goes along because they agree, because we've crafted this talking point that will be very divisive. We have crafted in such a way that I don't have to pay you to go repeat it. You'll repeat it because you like it. You find it attractive. So if I say, well, the American government's illegitimate because the Indians never ceded their land, and therefore anything that happens in the United States is illegal by definition. That's a very Russian talking point, very radical. You hear it a lot these days. There's some people pushing this whole unceded. I heard something in Vermont here. We're on unceded Abenaki land.
Well, didn't Billie Eilish just get jammed up for saying that, nothing is illegal?
Yeah,
And she's sitting in this like gazillion-dollar mansion in Malibu on Indian land, on Native
that's
American
right.
land.
That's right. Hey, so are you talking about your piece of property? Right. So that is classic Russian agitprop, where somebody might grab onto it and go repeat it because it kind of makes sense to them. Like, yeah, there were people here before me and they got a rough deal. And I think of myself as a good, high-minded person. I want to be fair to people. So part of my self-image is I try to solve injustice. And of course, I've been fed a talking point where I don't actually have to go at real injustice, income inequality, or lack of due process for my fellow neighbor or whatever. I can latch on to something that is totally abstract. Like 400 years ago, there were Native Americans on this land and they're not here anymore. I can latch on to that. I can virtue signal and without any consequence to me. So I love it. And I don't even know why I love it because it would never occur to me that somebody crafted this so that I would spread it and jam up all these political discussions. It's like, okay, yeah, it's unceded Wabanaki land or whatever, but we have to fill the potholes. So what's the budget this quarter?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's very Russian, and you can be a useful idiot if you just hear this and you repeat it. You're not on task. That's a Fed term would be.
Yeah, but Wyoming was on task. This guy was getting paid directly by the princess.
Oh, I'm going. So you've skipped ahead five layers there. There's agents who have been recruited up who are going to take they'll do little favors for this this intelligence officer, but they're not an intelligence officer. This dude is an intelligence officer who gets his paycheck from the Saudi government, and he set up 9/11. And when I read that stuff in the FBI reports that they declassified, I went, so the Saudis did it. Now, they probably had help from the Russians. There were some Israelis on site who were entirely too happy to watch those towers come down at the exact minute they came down. So maybe they were involved too. And the Egyptians there was a couple Egyptians rolling around here, and it was an international jihadist plot, maybe among others. But one thing's for damn certain, based on al-Bayoumy's behavior, he was an agent of that government. And we continued our relationship with that government after 9/11. We acted like they were allies.
Yes.
What's that?
We continue our relationship with him. What people don't realize is that the Southern District in California filed an indictment. So after 9/11, like many, many, many Saudis, he just happened to decide to take a long trip to England right before 9/11. And so he had moved from San Diego to
which
Birmingham,
country?
England. So he moved to the UK. So he had moved to the UK.
You mean a country that has the intelligence service that gave birth more or less to the tradecraft of ours? Because the CIA is really kind of a stepchild of MI6 and MI5.
So that's where these guys were. I know that's where he ended up. And I know that the imam from the King Fahd Mosque decided to go take a vacation in Saudi Arabia in 2001. We know that the bin Ladens were allowed to fly out of the U.S. before and after 9/11 on private chartered jets. We know that there was a lot of shenanigans around the Saudis. And we know that this guy, within days, was named as a suspect because of his affiliation with the hijackers. They get the hijackers' ID. They do a background check on him. Any reporter would have done this. They come up with an address in San Diego and they find out that the Saudi spy paid their rent. They found out that the Saudi spy helped them buy a car. They found out that the Saudi spy helped them enroll in airplane flying lessons. So clearly this guy was involved.
And when you say spy, I mean spy, you mean somebody who works for the government. So,
correct.
Which means he has a boss high up in the Saudi government who directed that intelligence officer to engage in a conspiracy to bomb the United States, thus to buy flight lessons, to pay for apartments, to obfuscate, to run, to destroy evidence, whatever. Spy stuff, classic spy stuff. But what we very rarely have in these circumstances, all of these things are blinded behind 8 different layers. That's how you do it. because otherwise you'll get caught. Because you know what normally happens, and I think this is what you're on about. Normally what happens is if we tie that to your government, we'll nuke you in the face because that is an assault on the United States. So basically 25 years ago, the Saudi government attacked the United States of America and pulled off the most successful assault on this country since Pearl Harbor. And nobody declared war on them. And pretty much we knew about it.
Covered it up, which is the worst part, which brings us to our story, because the FBI indicted this guy in California. There was an indictment because he lied on his immigration paperwork. We know he had a no-show job at a Saudi-owned company as an accountant. And how do we know that? Because the 9/11 families proved it in this lawsuit. The direct quote in my story from the federal judge overseeing this lawsuit in New York City's Southern District is, number one, we need to know what the hell were they doing in LA? And I'm obviously paraphrasing. Number two, if you expect us to believe as Americans that this guy was an accountant at this no-show job at a Saudi civil, aviation company, it stretches credibility that he would just happen to pay the bills for these Saudi hijackers. It's ridiculous. So right now, where it stands is, at the very least, hopefully, we are going to hear this discovery in open court, thanks to the great lawyers who have fought, when I say tooth and nail, against our own Justice Department to find this evidence. And that's part of it that I think people should find enraging. It's enraging. When I wrote my Boston Marathon book, I was apoplectic that Congress issued subpoenas to the FBI to ask questions about the FBI's relationship to Tamlin Tsarnaev, the older dead brother. They didn't show up. The FBI can get away with just ignoring a congressional subpoena, and this is a matter of public record. Go back and look at C-SPAN. When you have Mike McCall, who people would argue is a right-wing nut from Texas, and you have Bill Keating, who's a very progressive liberal from Massachusetts, and the two of them are on the same page, screaming and yelling about the FBI blowing them off, and the FBI, in the words of Michael McCall, this information does not belong to the FBI, it belongs to the American people. In the words of Bill Keating, if you recall, and many other lawmakers, went to Russia with Steven Seagal, the actor, where they came back from that trip saying they got more information from the FSB about the Boston Marathon bombers than they got from their own FBI. That's a startling statement when you given the current political climate, and that wasn't that long ago. It was 2013.
Right. Now, going to play footsie with the FSB is an interesting political choice. Speaking of, getting
But when the FBI blows you off and lies about their circumstances and their relationship with the Boston Marathon bombing, it seems absurd. You're going to Dagestan with Steven Seagal. Come on. Like right there, it's like, is this a comedy? It sounds like something you would read in The Onion. But it was reality because the FBI blew off Congress. That should not be allowed. The FBI blew off these families. That should not be allowed. The FBI literally hid this information that we're talking about with this Saudi intelligence officer, Bayomi. They buried an indictment. That indictment got sealed and buried until it was unsealed in July of 2024. Why? Why did they let this guy walk? We're not the only ones asking. The Parliament, and this is how I got onto the story, the UK Parliament is like, this is an outrage that the FBI burned Scotland Yard in the way that they did. And I'll let you explain it because this is your world. How significant do you see that when you see the UK Parliament censor the FBI for lying to its investigators? This is akin to the United States Congress saying Scotland Yard screwed them over publicly and demanding answers.
So let's see if I can get this on stage here. So it was 8 September 2025. The British Parliament started talking smack about the FBI. Even though, I have a few questions for him here, where, they have really good intelligence and law enforcement as well, better than ours in a lot of cases. They have a lot of intel about the Saudis, right? I haven't read this from Parliament yet. I forget exactly what their angle was. That you're saying that they were saying that the FBI was being obstructive, correct?
Correct. So the FBI, as they picked up Biomi in Birmingham, England, they were questioning him as the FBI executed a search warrant at his house. What was not shared with Scotland Yard and those investigators was what was found. There's a trove of evidence directly linking this Saudi spy to the attack on 9/11, including a welcome dinner he had with the hijackers after he paid their rent, the very same day that he put up the 10 grand to get them into the apartment because they don't have an ID, they don't have a job, they don't have anything. And the spy put up co-signed their lease. Then that day he has a welcome dinner for them with some Saudi officials and the imam from the San Diego Mosque that same night. There's a video of it, which obviously he needed to send back to his bosses. See, I'm taking care of the hijackers.
Okay, so in counterintelligence, you may be dealing with somebody who is a second generation sleeper. Their family may have come over here from Russia in the 40s or the 60s or whatever, and they have been raised a certain way to do certain things. But then they go on to train some other people who go on and take these actions. So when you're in counterintelligence, you're going to look at what this person's doing, and you're going to try and figure out what their goal is. You attribute their actions maybe to the initiatives of some foreign power to see, is this the Chinese trying to get one over on us? Is this Russian? Or is it something else? Or is this person gone rogue? These things can be really super subtle. This is not really super subtle. This is a Saudi guy who worked for the government, who paid for this stuff. Like, this information is as easy to acquire and analyze as it gets. We know the nationality. We know who. We know what they did. And we know why they did it. And they blew up New York. And they blew up the Pentagon. So why is it taking us 25 years? Why did it take...
This guy had a sketch, which had a very complicated mathematical equation because he was an aviation guy, that showed don't ask me, I don't want to be misquoted, but experts say they took a look at this sketch and said, this is this guy calculating how fast the Flight 77 has to be flying to hit the Pentagon at the exact right speed at the exact right time. So these calculations were very clearly linked to, it literally said 77 on it. Flight 77, which was the hijack flight that these knuckleheads took from Dulles. And don't even get me started on the intelligence failures that took place. Not only did the Malaysians send us video of these two hijackers saying, hey, these guys were being treated like celebrities at the Al-Qaeda meeting spot where they had it was like a resort. They had a vacation, Al-Qaeda vacation, where they plotted 9/11. Right. And then these guys are sent to Southern California. They're taking lessons. They're so dumb they can't pass the lessons. So they do not become pilots. They become what they call muscle hijackers. These are the guys that pulls out the box cutters, and we know
the box cutter guys.
Yep. We know that on Flight 77, it just happened to be piloted by a very well-respected, highly decorated Air Force captain who struggled with the hijackers for control of the flight and very likely died in the cockpit before it hurled into the Pentagon. At least that's the story his wife was told by Air Force officials. But in the end, they had intel on these guys. They didn't kill their visas. So right away we had problems. But on the morning of September 11th, there's two hijacker brothers. There's the pilot and there's two other idiots. The two brothers, one of them didn't have a photo ID. A customer service rep said, hey, this guy, we should probably take a second look. He doesn't have an ID. They let him through. At the screening, which was, of course, obviously not TSA at the time, but there was screening. They set off the metal detectors because obviously they had box cutters on them. They were also wanted and waved through. There was so many opportunities to stop these guys that you have to wonder, what is the FBI's end game by not sharing this information about al-Bayoumi? That's your world. Why would they stonewall?
It is a good question. So I'm going to throw up a paragraph here from from the thing from UK Parliament, which was September of last year. So this is David.
This is recent. This is new information. Everything about Biomi that we're talking about, no one knew until like
6
a few
months
months
ago.
ago. Exactly.
Yesterday's edition of the Sunday Times revealed that in the aftermath of 9/11, the Metropolitan Police were forced to release Omar al-Bayoumi, who is believed to be a Saudi intelligence agent accused of supporting the hijackers because the FBI withheld evidence. That is explosive already.
That's a very strong statement from members of the legislature in England, is it not? Or am I misreading this? This feels like it's a pretty strong statement.
Punching America's number one most important law enforcement agency in the face is a big deal for our allies. Yes.
And then, by the way, Richard Blumenthal and John Cornyn, I love a bipartisan matchup, right? Both of them are now demanding answers from Kash Patel, who's been blowing them off. So there's a letter from Blumenthal and Cornyn from the Senate Intelligence Committee, like, what the hell? But how did they find out? They found out from Parliament, not from the FBI. And the FBI has steadfastly blown them off, too.
So I want to read through this, and some people listen to this podcast. So just for the rest of this, arrested in Birmingham 10 days after 9/11, al-Bayoumi was taken to London to be interrogated by Met counter-terror officers. The FBI declined to provide those officers with vital evidence of al-Bayoumi's involvement in 9/11. The evidence included a hand-drawn aircraft diagram, trajectory calculations matching the Pentagon attack, as you said, and an address book with the attacker's code name, a code name that bin Laden himself did not disclose until a year later. The FBI's refusal to disclose this evidence prevented al-Bayoumi's extradition to the United States. FBI records show that in 1999, al-Bayoumi met two officials from the Saudi Ministry of Islamic Affairs. Those officials were assessed to be part of a network of individuals connected with the facilitation of two 9/11 attackers. A separate 2017 assessment by the FBI's Arabic specialists concluded that Mr. al-Bayoumi was a co-optee of the Saudi General Intelligence Presidency, which is its secret service. A full investigation by the Intelligence and Security Committee is needed. It must investigate why the FBI clearly avoided extraditing Mr. al-Bayoumi and exactly what the involvement was of the Saudi government, in particular their Ministry of Islamic Affairs and their Secret Service. As the minister said, it is nearly 25 years since 9/11. In that time, we have extradited many innocent people to America, but we failed to extradite someone who deserved to be sent over there. We need to get to the bottom of this, in part so we do not see this terrible atrocity happen again. So, thumpity thump thump, that is the Brits throwing us under the bus, particularly the FBI. But of course, they have secret services as well that keep track of these things. Mm-hmm. And they're probably in possession of a couple of morsels of information. But 6 months ago or so, they come out in Parliament and go, hold on, the FBI covered up 9/11. I mean, that's huge. And this is why you suddenly bringing this to everyone's attention a few days ago. I'm like, what's this? What's going on here? But and I miss this from UK Parliament. There's so much going on these days. But 6 months ago, all of a sudden, the Brits start pointing a super soaker filled with cat pee at us and 9/11 is your fault. Like, that's real. It's been 25 years. That's pretty interesting, Michelle, isn't it?
Oh, well, that's the part I'm hoping you can explain to me, because why now? Listen, the 9/11 families are grateful that it happened because the information that we got from Scotland Yard is what provoked the federal judge in this lawsuit. It's unfathomable to me, as somebody who went to countless funerals for friends and wrote stories about the thousands of kids left orphaned who are now adults, and watched what's going on at Gitmo. If anything, the very rare things that take place at Guantanamo Bay these days, when I pay attention because I lost friends. Like, the whole country should be outraged by this. There is a glaring cover-up that's going on. And who are we protecting and why? Why would a guy like this, a nobody spy? And now, I mean, you find out that at the time,
What do you mean by that? Let's just unpack that. When you say, why would they protect a nobody spy?
well, okay, that's the question. On paper,
I would say he's not
claiming,
nobody. We're talking about somebody who was an operational, an intelligence officer in the most successful covert operation in espionage history. I mean, right up there. I mean, he managed to. He's from a country that was demonstrably weaker in every sense, including their Secret Service. They should not have the ability to overwhelm FBI counterintelligence and the CIA, especially when put together with France's DGSE, Spain's CNI, the aforementioned MI6, as in our partners should be all over jerks like this. And then there's our own CIA should know when something's coming from overseas, and the FBI should be definitely, if FBI counterintelligence is supposed to track, covert operations, much less terrorism on our soil, we're talking about guys, they were not in the basement of a Hallmark card shop in Topeka, Kansas, planning this. They were in Los Angeles at a gigantic mosque that was funded directly by the Saudi king. And they were as loud about it as possible. And yet they were allowed to run around. Nobody caught this,
they got driver's licenses. They got, they went to pilot school. They took English classes. But worse, the two hijackers lived with a longtime paid FBI informant codenamed Muppet. Wait, what?
That's right. I read your story. They lived with the Fed. They lived with a Fed. They lived with a double agent.
Informant. Right. Like what is happening? And then that FBI agent who was the handler for Muppet is now uncooperative. And you're like, what? And by the way,
okay, now we're gonna we got to slow this down. We'll slow this down for everybody.
Yeah, because my string wall brain now is bouncing.
So we got to break it down for everybody. So, because I sat there in the aftermath of 9/11 and watched Condoleezza Rice go, nobody imagined airplanes as weapons. You know what I did in Washington, D.C.? I wrote scenarios of potential future threats. That's what I did. You know what people did in my business? They wrote scenarios of people running planes into buildings. It's not that it's filled with explosive gasoline or whatever else you want. We fire missiles off of planes all the time. Why not just use the plane as a missile? Oh, wait, that's called kamikaze. I mean, the idea of using a plane as a weapon and being unheard of. I'm sitting there listening and they're going, oh, I never thought of using a plane as a weapon. You've never seen a World War II film with the Japanese ever? Okay, so that was gaslighting. It wasn't just stupid. It was knowingly psychologically abusive. That level of stupid, of going, yeah, no, we just didn't know that they'd use planes. No one knew. It was a failure of imagination. But in reality, the two guys who were under the direct tutelage of a Saudi intelligence officer who was able, we know this from the declassified files, was able to walk in and out of the consulate. One of the main things a country's security service is going to do is they're going to monitor the doors at all the embassies and consulates. You know why, Michelle? Because we don't want our assholes who work at the FBI or the Pentagon, who have some form of crisis or a drug problem or gambling problem or whatever. We don't want them to be what's known as a walk-in, where they walk in the front door of an embassy and go, hey, I got a copy of that report in my apartment. You want to see? Because they do
we do know that they had footage of Biomi going into the Saudi consulate,
yes,
which
they do.
Just happened to be a couple of blocks away from the FBI field office for Los Angeles, which is a startling coincidence. But he walked right in, They have video of it. They were
They
clearly
have the
watching
video.
this
Right.
guy. They
Okay.
were watching this guy. They knew
So,
this guy. They knew the imam. So they had cases open on these guys. Why let him go? They indicted him. Why let him go? Why seal the indictment? That's the part that doesn't make sense to me.
there's what's
That's
known as official cover and there's non-official cover. Official cover is when you work at the embassy, but you're really an intelligence officer. Happens all the time. Dirty secret. Many people who are placed in American embassies abroad really work for the CIA. Many other countries like Russia, basically nobody in the embassy isn't an intelligence officer of some form, right?
well, the imam had a job at the embassy, so we know that.
Yeah.
The King
Okay.
Fahad Mosque imam also had diplomatic immunity from the embassy. His embassy
And you're
job.
telling me it's 2 blocks from the
2 blocks.
FBI field office.
Correct.
So, to recap the recap of the recap. So you've got a Saudi intelligence officer who is well known by everybody to really be part of the government. And meanwhile, he's setting up this terrorism. And what is it? You said
Allegedly, yep.
allegedly. Then one of the attackers gets to walk into a U.S. airport without an ID at all. He didn't
Correct.
bring his ID, but he did bring his box cutter. And it was before the TSA, but still, they didn't just they still had metal detectors in 2001, right?
Yep.
So he somehow gets in with a huge chunk of metal. And all these guys who barely know how to fly planes, who are directly under the auspices of the Saudi government, walk
Well,
in.
I can definitely see those 2 hijackers. I can connect them directly.
Got it. And then we turned around and we attacked Afghanistan. And then we attacked Iraq based on completely fraudulent intelligence. And everything we learned about it, it's more and more fraudulent than last we thought. I've done videos on this channel about the now declassified. This is now declassified. You can see what was top secret in 2001 and 2002. Not everything, but the reports from the CIA and component and other agencies that worked with them, that the excuses they gave to say that Iraq was a threat, when you read the actual documents, they weren't even bothering to lie. They did not really think that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. They've now declassified this. They said it was a switcheroo. They told us, oh, he's got weapons. And then in their documents behind the scenes, it says he wants weapons. There's a difference between me being hungry at noon and wanting a ham sandwich and having a ham sandwich. Huge difference. If I have one, I can eat one. If I would merely want one, I can't eat the ham sandwich and I would still be hungry. Materially different situations. The kind of thing that intelligence analysts are paid to discern. So we were told, the American people, they have weapons. We now look at their documents and it says he wanted weapons. That's different than having weapons. So we weren't just, they didn't just bullshit us. Then they didn't just lie to us. They lied to us with a level of cynicism that is hard to calculate. So,
which is why I think people have a hard time understanding this. I mean, even now, look, what's crazy is the princess who was paying this spy we've been talking about, Bayomi, she was the wife of the Saudi ambassador who just happens to be all over the Epstein files. So it's just like, it's these...
What?
Shocker. So it's like these same players, like what you always say, these assholes again. It's like the same people keep showing up in the most unlikely of places. And whenever there's something where the U.S. government is trying to stonewall, to me, I don't know how you look.
I want you to slow down,
someone
though.
in their face and say, we're not going to help you with this lawsuit. And here's why: money. I just don't understand it. Like, I don't understand how you could be, and every administration has done it. Bush, Obama was the worst because he actually vetoed JASTA, which allowed the lawsuit to go forward in the first place. And I'll let you explain JASTA.
So I want to call you back to the Saudi ambassador or some form of official
The ambassador to the United States at that time was, and I know I'm mangling everybody's name, so I apologize in advance, but Bill Hillel, right? So he is the guy who's now showed up in the Epstein files. His wife, the princess, and do not ask me for her name. It's in the story, lamag.com. She was providing the payments. So they're not even hiding. So if I write you a check, Eric, to blow up, Mark Aragos's firehouse that I'm sitting in right now, there's a paper trail. That's a paper trail. We have a paper trail directly from very high-ranking Saudi diplomats.
Yes, that would be called obvious. That would be called easy to get. But
So
you just
happening?
said that the woman writing the checks for 9/11 is related to a guy in the Epstein files.
Correct.
Did I get that right?
I think so.
So why has this taken
just happened to have a lot
25
of
years?
Exactly. This guy has a ton of connections all over the world. We all watched. I really was shocked when, every administration, we know Bush shut it down because he ordered the release of this Saudi spy. People expected more for Obama. Yay, he's going to be on the side of the 9/11 families. Nope, quite the opposite. There was the Justice Against Sponsors of Foreign Terrorism Act that was passed by Congress in 2017 and promptly vetoed by President Obama at that time, who said this is going to complicate relationships with the Saudis. Frankly, I think a lot of us who were there at ground zero were like, who gives a shit if it complicates our relationship with the Saudis? Let's side with the dead and the families and the friends that we lost. But no, that wasn't the case. Luckily, Congress overrode his veto. Then we have Biden. And Biden did the right thing by releasing the so-called 28 pages, which are a lot more than 28 pages because you followed that fantastic Twitter thread that everyone should read. So at least Biden declassified some of this intelligence that we've had the Bush administration bury, the Obama administration bury. Biden released some of it. Then you think Trump is going to come in his first term and say, we're going to side with New York 100%. I'm a New Yorker. I was there. I love these 9/11 families. I love the military. I mean, think about how many soldiers have died since in these wars you just brought up. Absolutely. We're going to make sure that everything gets declassified. Quite the opposite.
And
instead, in November 2025, he invites the prince, which pissed off these families who protested with that wanted poster that's in my story about wanted Omar al-Bayami was from a protest from these 9/11 families who were like, how are we inviting these people to the White House? And then Trump was asked, well, what about this? What about Jamal Khashoggi? And he says, things happen. And that's the attitude that every administration has had towards the families of the 2,977 people who perished in these attacks. And to me, that's astonishing and should be outrageous. And everyone in this country needs to rise up in the way that we rose up when we saw police brutality. This is a different sort of brutality. This is brutality against our intelligence. And it is a complete, like you said, super soaker to the faces of the families of the dead. And to me, it's unconscionable. And really, as a nation, we need to rise up and fight back against every administration, the Justice Department, and it's all of them. And what does it all come down to? The powerful. And that's why the Epstein files disclosure. That's why I applaud these bipartisan lawmakers who were like, no, Kash Patel, give us the truth on 9/11. No, Justice Department, we want all of the Epstein files. It's all related because we're protecting the powerful. And that's where you please come in and
George W. Bush was also it was his administration, and it was Alberto Gonzales was Attorney General by the time this happened. They're the ones who they actually had an indictment of Jeffrey Epstein. A long time he's doing two things. He's sex trafficking children all over the place, but he's also setting up for the destruction of the American banking system through the mortgage market and derivatives from his positions in Bear Stearns. He is joined by a great number of financial traders to the United States, but he's a man for all seasons, and he pulls off all of these offenses against humanity in general and our country in particular. And it's the Bush administration, Bush 43, who lets him go and allows him to plead to state charges.
Disgusting.
So we've got someone tied into his network who funded 9/11.
Correct.
These are details that have never been put together. So, and you and I are not looking forward to getting shot and thrown into a pond. We kind of both know it's possible.
Let's just both put it on the record. I do drive an old shitbox police car, but it has brakes. I've got them checked. You know, I sat like, listen, when Ro Connor and Tom Massey were like, we're not suicidal, they did it in jest, but it really is, it's true. I mean, look what, in Russia, they're not even going to bother locking you up. You know, that billionaire in the Epstein files just ended up in a pool of blood in his super luxury high-rise in Moscow, right?
Some people just get depressed and stab themselves in the back 3 times with 4 kitchen knives. It happens.
It happens, you know, it happens.
More in Russia than
elsewhere. It doesn't happen to me. I'm a very happy girl, obviously.
Right. Well, and I think there is a convergence here. I think it is not for nothing that in September of 2025, all of a sudden the Brits move and they're like, "Oh, we need to talk about the you know who covered this up? You know who covered this up? It's the FBI." Okay, so it's interesting. You have Kash Patel is not forthcoming about everything people would like him to be. And he was not...
flew off the Senate Intelligence Committee about this exact issue that we are talking about.
But Patel is a very important individual because he is not like everybody else. And the people that they brought in at the top of the FBI were not part of the well-groomed group of senior executive service law enforcement people that normally crawl to the top of the DOJ.
The usual suspects that are involved in every single story, whose names we know very well.
Right. And many who we don't know as well, they are GS-14s and 15s in D.C. They are part of the senior executive service of the government that we just nobody knows about. But as long as you have a certain selection process for leadership, you can get what you want out of these institutions. Now, it's very interesting. I was surprised to find out that there were British defense contractors who were allowed to help, I think, train senior executives from our intelligence services. That would surprise me. It seemed like they'd be the kind of thing that we could do on our own to form our own leadership. Why would the Brits want to be involved in that? And who's the first crew of the Epstein folks? Just total left turn, ADHD. Who's the first group of people to get arrested from the Epstein files? It's the Brits.
Only people, you mean? The only people. Let's be clear. The only people to get arrested. No one in the United States have been arrested for the Epstein files.
But Norway, they're not the only ones. It's Norway as well. And they've been executing search warrants in France. So the arrests and search warrants go out in Britain, Norway, France, and then by the end of the week we have destroyed Iran. I mean, this is wild times. So let's not drive past that.
And the one Russian guy, had a bout of suicidal tendencies.
He slipped and fell into a vat of polonium tea after shooting himself 3 times. Yes, or as I call it, the Russian retirement plan. They don't get AARP; they get this. I mean, I don't know. Something happens to you when you describe yourself as Ghislaine Maxwell's soulmate. I don't know. You're not going to end well. It's just a thought here.
Yeah.
In the words of They Might Be Giants, you can't shake the devil's hand and say you're only kidding.
How shocked. You know what's funny about that, too? That email was from a few weeks before 9/11 when Epstein and Maxwell were going to Moscow. Yeah, that's just my ADHD aside, but I'm like, this still goes back to 01, 9/11. They're going to Russia.
Huh. You noticed that, huh?
I did, indeed. Now that we're saying it out loud, I just noticed it now. I'm like, oh, huh.
Yeah, so it was weird. Like I came out in 2016, as we talked briefly about, and I said, hey, everyone, you might want to learn a little bit about how Russian tradecraft works when it comes to spies. And boy, the American media got really angry. They're like, that's conspiracy theory. That's mental illness. You're not supposed to notice all these different people slipping away and going to Russia at different times.
Or notice that Jeffrey Epstein had a Saudi passport with a Saudi.
Thank you. That was issued by the Austrians. And And everybody is talking. He's a pedophile. Like that's the least distinct thing about him. Like yes, he also raped children in his spare time.
Yeah,
But
disgusting. Yep.
but he got an Austrian passport with a Saudi address on it. I mean, that is stuff that you've written many books. You've dealt with editors. Can you name a single book editor who would not kick that premise back and say, not plausible, not believable?
100%. Most of the stuff I'm reading in the Epstein files is like, cannot possibly be true. And then it is.
Because I know you've written a bunch. You've written a bunch of pilots. You've written for TV. You've written for movies. You've done it. If it's got words on a page, you've done it, right?
Yep. And this Epstein story would never pass muster with an editor, with a producer, with, a television producer for a documentary. This stuff is so beyond the scope of like humanity. It's so inhumane that you can't even believe it. And then you
we're
look
not
at
even warmed up
9/11 and say, why would our own government hurt the 9/11 families? And you're like, I can't even wrap my brain around this. I can't. There's no amount of money in the world that would make me sell out my countrymen.
Because you're not a psychopath.
You could offer me. Correct. Do you know Epstein called Trump a psychopath, and in direct reference to him bombing Iran? One of the emails is Epstein saying he could possibly bomb Iran or Syria because he's a psychopath. Jeffrey Epstein put that in writing to, I believe, George Mitchell, the 9/11 commissioner, for half a minute. So George Mitchell showing up in the Epstein files all over the place.
Wasn't he? He's from Maine, right?
Yeah, he's from Maine. They're ripping his face off the buildings in Maine as we speak.
I
do not believe it. George Mitchell was like a Boston hero because of his work in Ireland, right? And now he turns out to be an Epstein dirtbag.
Say that again. For his work in Ireland on the Troubles, right?
On the Troubles, which Jerry Adams, CIA informant. What a shocking coincidence. I still think that the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist was pulled off by federal entities to give Jerry Adams money as a bribe to become the CIA asset that we all know that he is now.
I mean, the Soviets crawled up into Ireland in like 1920. That was one of
I did not know that.
Oh yeah, that's Kremlin-y as all get out. So you had George. So you had somebody who was tied up in the Troubles, was put in charge of the 9/11 Commission. Did I hear that correctly?
Yep. For half a minute, George Mitchell was a 9/11. I think it was the vice director or the vice chair of the commission. For some reason, he bowed out of that position. But George Mitchell and Epstein go way back, way back. And now George Mitchell is, I think there's levels that Epstein is like pedo, then there's perv, then there's just general dirtbag. And I think Mitchell falls between perv and general dirtbag in the Epstein files from what I've read so far.
And Chancellor of Queen's University in Belfast.
I did not know that. Did he get booted yet?
And he was chairman of DLA Piper, a white shoe law firm. Have you ever heard of DLA Piper?
I have, but why? I feel like I know this law firm very well for some reason.
Well, Kamala Harris's husband.
That's right. I'm in California. That's right.
They're a major entertainment law firm there, but everything law firm. But they have another distinction in my world. They were the very first registrant in the Foreign Agent Registration Database, which was designed for the Nazis and Soviets. Number 2 was TASS, the Soviet Telegraph Agency. Number 1 registrant was DLA Piper. Who did they represent? I don't believe it's out in the unclassified who they represented, but they are the number 1 registrant in the FARA database. 1938. The FARA was passed in 1938 to deal with Soviet and communist propaganda that was being spread throughout the United States by the people that eventually ended up as the Nazi war machine, and as well as the Soviets. DLA Piper was the number 1 registrant, was an American company. And so he happened
if you look at my house in Venice, I am triangulated between DLA Piper's main branch, Rand, and that mosque. Right smack dab in the middle is where you find my little dumpy studio apartment. But isn't that interesting? Rand, the mosque, and DLA Piper all here.
Huh. How about that? I mean,
Huh. All on the west side.
there's a lot going on the west side there. Thousand Oaks
Sure is.
over there. Yeah, you ever hear of Yuri Bezmenov?
No.
Soviet defector in the 1980s. You go on YouTube, go look up a video of Yuri Bez talking to the John Birch Society, the ultra right wing guys. And he's warning us about what the Russians are going to do over time. We will defeat you. And he was in this country because he was a defector. He broke away from the terrible Soviet system, and he was warning us of the evils of communism. Eventually, he got kicked out. That cover didn't work any longer. But there's a very, very arresting video of him talking about what we're going to do is slowly demoralize your institutions. We're going to break you down at the level of family, at the level of your churches, at the level of business. We're going to take away your beliefs in yourself. We're going to corrode the memory of your heroes. We're going to distort your historical understanding. This is it will take decade over decade. We're trained for that. In other words, if you go back to 1982, I think, which is when this video was, and you look at everything that kind of happened up until the election of Donald Trump, which was where the Russian propaganda was being, Russian style propaganda, it wasn't just Russian nationals, was florid. It was everywhere. It's one of the reasons I spoke up, is like this stuff that was just so unmissable was everywhere. Yuri Bezmenov, 35 to 40 years before that, said, this is what we're going to do. And it's going to take us decades, but we're going to slowly break you down. And this is how we're going to do it. And then it looks like someone did it. So,
well, you know who owned the Boston Marathon? The Boston Marathon bombers got into the country on a tourist visa from Ankara, Turkey, which just happened to be where Graham Fuller was the CIA station chief. They move into a home that was owned by a Russian defector who was Graham Fuller's Russian studies professor. So that house in Cambridge, Massachusetts was owned by a Russian defector who was teaching Russian at Harvard. It just happened to be Graham Fuller's professor at Harvard University. So remember Russia, if you look at Operation Ghost Stories, that was like the long game. The Americans is based on that case. Those kids went to school with the knives.
Michelle, I was targeted by that guy.
You're kidding.
No, I had lunch with him. I sold his software products for a small period of time. Never exchanged any money, but we've met. And that show came out.
House does deny. Oh, you mean the real guy, the Operation Ghost Stories guy?
The Operation Ghost Stories guy. So no, that guy was pretending to be Canadian. This was to my great shame, which I told the FBI about when they naturally wanted to talk to me down the line after he'd been deported. I sat down with the feds and they said, all right, start at the top. What do you want to say about this situation? And I said, I am so pissed. I said, why are you pissed? I said, he never swore. He said he was French Canadian. I'm from Vermont. I speak French. I speak Canadian French. Not one single calice, not one tabarnak, not one sacrament, not one testament. We would go back and forth, he and I, between English and French. His French was perfect. His English was great. He had a weird accent that eventually kind of got under my skin. And eventually he just called too many times. He was just showing up in Washington, D.C. a little too often. My understanding was he was getting a little close to the Clinton people when he was operating. He was starting to get into Hillary's inner circle or something to that effect.
Well, the Clinton Foundation and Harvard, I mean, of course they did. So that's what they were going after in that case, and they did it very successfully. They've infiltrated the colleges, they infiltrated the schools. Even when my book came out, they asked me to do a book signing. The Russians did, the Russian studies program or whatever it was, at the Harvard Club. And of course I did it. If it meant I was going to sell 150 books, which I did. But hey,
this is your Tsarnaev book. This is your. So the Russians wanted to scope you.
Book signing.
These guys always go at small business people And they, at first, they don't
Is
push
that
hard.
been a broke ass writer? Let's be clear. Like,
Well, because you need something. You need something.
You're gonna buy 150 books? Yes, now.
You're gonna okay, yeah, I'll show up. Hey, I've been on Russia Today a couple times, right? So I go on. Now, do I report these things in detail? But and do I go on them anymore? No, we don't get. I got sanctioned in 2022. The Russians and I we know about each other now when we don't get along. It's good. But 10, 12 years ago, I get a call from Russia Today. I'll go on, yeah, and talk to another American about something that I've been saying anyhow. And then the way they would do recruitment of that sort would be they just see what you said and they say, do you want to say the thing you already said over here? You said this on social media, you wrote this on your blog. Do you want to go say this on our show? I'll be like, sure, it's no problem. I'm not taking any tasking there. And it's interesting. I might see how they do the handling of these folks. So you deal with all Americans. I was on twice. And then somebody named Yelena calls me. I'm like, nah, we're not dealing with Yelena. I'll go on your thing. But,
Yeah, I don't want to hang out for dinner. I'm not having coffee on a Thursday with you either. I'll just show up for the book signing. But remember, these shows get booked a lot. When your book comes out, you have a PR guy that's like, show up here, show up there, show up everywhere. And of course you can, you just.
But they got a file on you. So they go, you want to come to the book signing? You're like, sure, I'll do the book signing. Like, do you want to go for coffee?
Right. That's when I say.
No, but somebody else might. And so let's say they know that there's something about you, you really like redheads, or you really have always wanted to date an African person or something like that. And they put that person in your path. And then you go more in that direction. They go, well, would you do this for us? And would you do that? And what about the, and next thing you know, now you have a different relationship. But this is the classic. Okay, now we're talking about counterintelligence.
We're talking about recruitment, but
we're talking about recruitment. But to get back to the Saudi stuff that you've been writing about, when you're talking about the recruitment of somebody, so you got a professor, and maybe he's from over here, and maybe he does this, but it's not calculated. He's teaching literature. Now, he invites writers to here. He's doing what we call spot and assess. He might be one part of this. He's getting information. He's going to hand this to Sergey, who's going under the name Jacob as part of his cover. And Jacob's going to use the information that guy to go try and do this as part of a long-range development plan of blah, 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 blah. That is not what you've been writing about. What you've been writing about is a Saudi intelligence officer living in the middle of Los Angeles, recruiting murderers to commit murder. Everyone knows about it. Everyone knew about it. This is the easiest stuff in the counterintelligence world to figure out. There is no reason not to know about it. There's no reason that all these countries didn't know about it. And yet, 25 years later, we're still getting bullshitted. So what's up, folks?
Why are we getting bullshitted 25 years later about the Saudis? Especially now where, this week they were very critical of the strike in Iran, at least publicly. They came out with their foreign ministry, had a statement saying that they were going to protect their interests with whatever that took. So it did sound like there was a little bit of a break between the chummy relationship with the Trump administration and the Saudis, at least on the surface. Who knows what's going on underneath that? So maybe this is the chance now that the 9/11 families are finally going to get a little bit of justice. And shout out to the U.S. District Court Judge Greg Daniels, who's looking at this and calling bullshit. He's the first guy in 25 years to look at the evidence and say, I call bullshit on this. Yes, let's have a hearing. The Saudis have been filing a flurry of documents to try to stop that from happening. But let's all pray that hopefully this gets at least aired out in a courtroom in New York City, in the Southern District, which is filled with some of the best judges in the nation.
I wonder if we're not at a real confluence for time here, where all these things are happening at once. We're taking apart the cartels. Venezuelans are down. The Iranians are down. We're isolating the Chinese. It's funny. The North Koreans are finally very, very quiet. Looks like we have a way to get the Russians under control. Meanwhile, we are exposing the psychopaths in our midst. And we are exposing their relationship with the British royal family. And we are now looking at the networks of elites that apparently have no problem with mass abuse of our children in some of the nastiest ways. This is all happening at the same time. Perhaps
what is
that's not
up?
on accident.
Right.
I think you can't, you can't discuss one of these things without starting to get into the others. And you've made some connections here tonight that have never been made, I don't think, between the Epstein people and the 9/11 attacks. So I think these guys work covertly, although barely covertly, in the sense that a lot of their operations are very easy to pick up, but they're so powerful that people will then cover up after them. There's information that could be given out to people that would solve the puzzle, but they are protected. Somebody covers it up. And I think they also have the ability to create very bombastic events that we are stuck talking about, whether it's, they knock over these buildings, or, in Midtown Manhattan or Lower Manhattan, or they shoot up a school in Connecticut, or a number of things. I mean, I forget how much of this has gone public, but when you look at the George Floyd, that wasn't any more organic in how it happened. It was not an accident. It doesn't seem, anyhow. I don't know how much is going to be out there, how quick, but until you take apart that network that can create these events all over the place, maybe it's not worth having the discussion. But if you're going to tear apart all the international money laundries, and you're going to tear apart the countries like Iran that have huge capacity for covert operations. They have spy networks, they have sleeper cells, they have all this stuff. Well, not anymore. They can't reach them. They can't send money to them. That's done now. Maybe you can't visit some of these really heavy subjects until you take these other things apart. And and were some of the people involved, were they aware of that? Were past FBI directors aware that it was so complicated that if you're the one that comes out and just starts talking about this, that what's going to happen is you're going to get smashed, you're going to get destroyed, and the truth isn't going to come out. So then where's anybody? You're screwed as an individual, and nobody's any better off. So why destroy yourself?
Well, there's a couple of FBI agents that deserve a lot of credit. They're named in my story. They were working on Operation Encore, and they've given public declarations on behalf of the 9/11 families, the 9/11 justice families, saying exactly what they learned and what was held from them. And I give people like that kudos because, like you said, they could definitely be destroyed. These are two guys who dedicated their lives to law enforcement. They worked really hard to try to get to the bottom of 9/11, and they were stonewalled by their own Justice Department. And they said as much in declarations that are now part of the discovery in this case. So there are people who are out there mounting the brave fight, and they deserve all the accolades in the world.
Michelle, nobody knows that about these two FBI guys. Nobody, you're the first across the line with that story. It's incredibly important. This is new. It may not be new to you. I guarantee you it's new to the audience. That there's two guys who came out on behalf of the families and said, our own FBI covered up key parts of this attack. That's not known to the public yet.
And they actually, said, look, this is what we know. I think, and I'm sorry that I don't have his name right in front of me, but he talked a lot about the mosque and how, the FBI had a case on the mosque and they were watching the mosque and they knew that this guy was dangerous. They knew he was saying crazy things. They knew he was trying to incite other people to recite crazy things. And yet nobody took any action. It's a matter of public record. Anyone who read the great book Looming Tower knows John O'Neill had been thumping that drum for a long time. The FBI agent who was on the ground for the first, and we're talking about the anniversary of the first World Trade Center bombing this week. And, he's been saying all along that Al-Qaeda had the capacity to pull off something catastrophic, and he was ignored. He quit his job, and weirdly, was the head of security at the World Trade Center towers. He was 2 weeks into his new job when he perished. So this is some crazy coincidences that are taking place, but there are definitely people. And so, people say I'm critical of the FBI and the handling of the Boston Marathon. I am, but not everybody. We're talking about the people at the very top who every time I look at any of these cases that I've written about, and I've written about a lot of them, it's the people at the top. And it's usually the same name, or the same 2 or 3 names over and over and over again. And people that you're familiar with, I don't need to get sued, but these are people that they're always, even if you look at Jerry Adams, who was around Boston at that time, who signed up Whitey Bulger, that same guy. Everywhere I look, Whitey Bulger, we have that guy. Jerry Adams, we have that guy. The Boston Marathon bombing, he was in charge of the FBI. Everyone's going to figure out who it is. I don't need to say it out loud, but the Russiagate, that guy. I'm shocked if I haven't looked yet, but I'd love to know where he appears, if at all, in the Epstein files. But it's the people at the very top that have stonewalled their own guys. Those are the ones that I'm talking about when I say that we should be critical. When we're going to march for reform, any police reform, the reform should start at the highest levels of government in counterterrorism, because people die over and over and over again because of these counterterrorism failures. And 9/11 is the most glaring example, but the Boston Marathon bombing mistakes were made, relationships were covered up 100%. We know that the Pulse nightclub shooter gave a shout out to the Boston Marathon bombers, and we know that the FBI had a file on them buying ammunition. So over and over and over again, these same people make mistakes and are never held accountable. And that's what I think these stories are important. We should ask the same question the Parliament is asking. The UK Parliament is asking the questions American people should be asking. What the actual F? Why are you stonewalling the families?
So, when bad guys go to characterize these discussions, they will talk about conspiracy theory and paranoia. Now, paranoia can be a real clinical thing where you become obsessed. The literal Greek term is being mindful of the margins. That's what paranoia means in Greek. Instead of focusing on what's in front of you, you're constantly focusing on the outside and that which is on the edge and maybe not as important as something else. So when you say, all these law enforcement or intelligence things, they run into the same 5 names. But there's a difference between paranoia and conspiracy theory, where somebody who isn't very knowledgeable necessarily has kind of an emotional angle of attack on these things. And they say, they're all out to get us. They arrive at the conclusion. They arrive at the answer before they even understand the question that's being asked, which is, they say, someone out there is out to get me. And they pick a few 3-letter agencies because they've heard of them. It's the CIA. And, you look on.
I've been a journalist online, covering the exact same thing for decades now.
Many of.
And so this is historical knowledge and documentation than any person who wants to do the work that I've done, which is the work. It is work. Thousands of pages. It's work. This is well documented. This is hardly paranoia. It's historical knowledge. When you create an expertise around a topic, and because I write about terrorism exclusively, and I was there at the Boston Marathon bombing on Boylston Street, I was there on 9/11 at Ground Zero, I watched the aftermath, I've covered the aftermath, I have countless police sources that are guiding me in my reporting. It's not paranoia, it is work. It's work. It's doing the job.
God bless you.
For very little money, by the way, so it's not like I'm out there getting rich off of this.
It's not paranoia.
I'm just getting pissed off. It's work.
Well, and if you see a pattern of the same names appearing over and over again, it is only natural to go, all right, we need to ask about this person. Why are William Barr? He's been Attorney General twice. Yep. First time he comes in, George H.W. Bush, and he shuts down an investigation into the theft of Promise software, which is the prosecutor's management information system. That was DOJ software that was there to join up the relational databases in the very early 80s for tax, counterintelligence, and criminal RICO, organized crime prosecutions. And during the Reagan administration, Ed Meese stops paying the bills for Inslaw. They go out of business, and those assets have to be put up for sale. The Promise software is then stolen, supposedly by Robert Maxwell, Guillen's dad, who sells it to the Russians and the Latvians and or whoever else. And of course, around that time, this guy Jeffrey Epstein starts working with the Maxwell family. In 1991, Bill Barr comes in and shuts down 2 investigations, one into BCCI, which is supposedly a front for the CIA, and whose money Jeffrey Epstein was probably running. And then Barr shuts down the investigation into the Promise software. Closes it up nice and tidy. Boom. Bill Clinton comes in. You go a couple presidents later, you have Donald Trump gets in office, and Bill Barr takes the seat as Attorney General again, and you get a shutdown of the Mueller investigation, or it gets guided and sort of it gets proposed to the American people a certain way, like nothing to see here. But around that time, Jeffrey Epstein is prosecuted. He's put in the Metropolitan Detention Center, and he's immediately dead, and his body's gone. And the guy who does who's the medical examiner is Dr. Michael Baden,
who's very famous.
Who's very famous for doing JFK, O.J. Simpson's wife, George Floyd, and Michael Brown Ferguson, among others.
And Sandra Birchmore, murdered by a police officer in Massachusetts in a 4-year cover-up that only came to light because of Michael Baden's work.
Interesting. I don't know if it's good, but it's interesting.
I'll send you that story. I did a deep dive on that one too.
He's all over the place, and then he does Jeffrey Epstein. But the guy who's really there, he's there is Bill Barr. Now, who hired Jeffrey Epstein to teach at the Dalton School? Donald Barr, William Barr's father.
Oh, now, I did not know that. Come on.
Right? So it's not paranoia if you just keep going, wait a minute, that's his dad? There's 330 million Americans. Not all of them hired Jeffrey Epstein or came in and covered something up that Jeffrey Epstein was involved in, and then came in and was there when Jeffrey Epstein got,
or ran
indicted.
His money through a banking system where the judge who was looking into the banking system had a mysterious knock at her door where her son ends up dead and her husband ends up. So there's a lot of things here. And yes, they've weaponized the word conspiracy. They've weaponized it. Now you're just a nut sitting in a basement, going down a rabbit hole. Or you could take and remember the days when journalism was respected. Investigative journalism led to Watergate. In fact, investigative journalism took down Jeffrey Epstein. And you put some more faith and I think what investigative journalists are capable of, because what we have been doing for decades, your work with what you do and putting together these plans and strategies and understanding all of this, how this whole mechanism works. You do it for corporations. Journalists do it for the public. And now they're trying to dismiss us as crackpots and idiots. It's really astonishing. But I think that, that's why I'm so grateful that you invited me on, because you do have that core audience of people who actually trust you, know what you're talking about, because you've proven it. You have a history of what you're saying is backed up by facts. That's really what we should be looking for. And this story in LA Magazine about the Saudis, all of it is contained in court records. Challenge me. Anyone can email me, Michele with 1L at michelemcphee.com. You can shout out a terrible question on Twitter. I'll answer it. All of this is backed up by documentation. This isn't sourced. This isn't deep sources. This isn't somebody leaked it to me to tickle the wire. This is part of a lawsuit. It's contained in a lawsuit. It's all public. You pulled the thread years ago, and now the thread continues. And hopefully this gets some attention for the families, because that's who matters in this entire story, are these families who are getting screwed over.
Well, you're doing actual journalism. You are picking a topic, you are gathering your information, and you're letting the story be told based on those facts. I mean, where I'm from, that's an intelligence analyst, but, whatever. But it's because the journalists that are out there in the corporate environment in general are people that have been trafficking, especially the last 10 years since Trump got in. You have a whole lot of this secret sources say, and several sources close to the matter say. And somebody gave me classified intelligence, which I'm going to tell you here, but I have rights as a journalist. I'm not going to tell you where I got this national defense information that is illegal for me to even possess at all under 18 U.S. Code 793, which has no statutory cutouts for...
Well, listen, if you were going to slide me a couple of those documents, I'm not going to say no, let's be honest, Eric. So I don't have a problem with the reporters doing their job, which is to try to get their hands on documents like that.
That I think a lot of things are overclassified. So in general, I see where you're going, but we have entire ecosystems of stories that are based on horseshit that when you get to when you finally get to the end, and we've got grand juries that are open right now that I think we know it ties into the Epstein people here because we've got Kathy Rumler, who was in Obama's administration. She was vetting.
That is a crazy story.
It's a crazy story, right?
Well, we can't start it because I have to go to a dinner in 10 minutes. But
that's right.
We can talk for the best. We could talk for hours because I love where your brain goes.
And perhaps we shall do it again. But I wanted to say thank you, and I wanted to learn more about what you were thinking, and it was such a great idea to do so. You are doing wonderful work out there, and I don't even think you recognize how important it is, but we'll make sure more people understand, and we'll get more people reading it. So where can we find more of you? You're on Twitter, right?
I'm on Twitter at Michele with one L, McPhee, McPhee. But I want to say thank you because honestly, it's people who are brave enough to speak out and connect the dots and be willing to pull the string. Without people like you, I think a lot of people would be held in the dark. There's more. We need more and more people. And when we see what's happening in newsrooms across the country, and we see what's happening to people like you who are being discredited by the Atlantic unnecessarily, it really is more and more important that people start to pay attention. And all of this research they can do themselves. You posted the documents. These aren't fake. Like they come from the FBI vault. Anybody can look at the FBI vault, look it up, the 9/11 28 pages, read it yourself. Once you start going down into these documents, you will become apoplectic, like you and I do, when we see these patterns that are ignored largely. This 9/11 story is a big one, and it's not going to go away. And hopefully, at the very least, we bring some Saudi government officials into a courtroom to answer some questions. If they don't want to do that, then they can pay the families. Two choices: pay or talk. Those are the two choices that the U.S. District Court judge has left them at this point.
And that is great news. And it's a wonderful timing that we have some district judges in the United States who are like, no, we're going to choose the right thing here. And you don't. It's not going to get dismissed on a Rule 12b-6. It's no, this lawsuit can go forward. You can use the American courts to get the truth. And God, you got to get to dinner. There is so much more to go. Michele McPhee, thank you for what you do. And thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, honestly. And to be continued. I would love to, talk again.
Oh, I'll promise you something.
Can you imagine the next time I'm in Vermont, we're going to take a barn and just do all the string walls from all the Epstein connections that go back to 9/11, because there's a lot of them. That's our next mission.
You're on. Done.
Deal. Done.
Deal. All right. And thank you for everybody who watches Game Theory today. Click like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and we will talk to you soon. Take care, all.